Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz will join us in a moment. Here's what we're looking at.
It takes 2 years. We cannot afford to wait 2 years.
This whole idea that somehow we're going to promote detectives and that's going to solve the problem, it's going to do absolutely nothing.
Key takeaways from the latest Chicago mayoral debate ahead of the runoff.
In this case, the motive is to become the President of the United States.
Former President Trump believes he'll be indicted. We break down the legal arguments. Proposed protections for immigrant workers who report unsafe work conditions.
And I'm just so excited for this next chapter. I can put all my talents to good use.
And it's a career-defining moment for hundreds of medical students. We catch up with two dreamers on match day. Now to Paris for our top story tonight.
Brandis, if there's one thing the candidates for Chicago mayor agree on, it's that crime and violence threaten the city's economic vitality. But the candidates have wildly different solutions to the seemingly intractable problem. At least that much was clear in tonight's debate between Paul Vallas and Brandon Johnson, hosted by our neighbors over at WGN. And WTTW news reporter Heather Sharon is here with more from the debate over there at 2501 West Bradley. So Heather, Johnson and Vallas, again, battling over the surge of crime that began during COVID and has receded just a little bit. Let's hear what they both had to say on this.
There's 1,100 vacancies that have not been filled, and we are bleeding officers to the tune of 80 to 90 a month because they're simply exiting. So this whole idea that somehow we're going to promote detectives and that's going to solve the problem, it's going to do absolutely nothing.
So that was just candidate Vallas on the issue. We've heard these things repeated like mantras. Heather, anything new from the candidates tonight?
Nothing. We heard Vallas just there saying he's going to fill every possible vacancy as quickly as possible, while Brandon Johnson vowed to reopen the city's mental health clinic and invest in youth programs, he said, to prevent crime from happening rather than arresting perpetrators after the fact.
And I know a lot more tussling over whether or not Brandon Johnson said he wants to, quote unquote, defund the police, which has been a talking point at every debate so far. The candidates also clashing over the closure of schools during COVID and the role the Chicago Teachers Union played in those decisions. Take a listen.
The governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, did the right thing by shutting down everything because it was a matter of saving lives. Unlike Paul Vallas, who was supported by the Republican Party, who referred to the governor as a dictator because we were trying to save lives.
And we're going to get to that dictator comment in a second, Heather, but Brandon Johnson, obviously former teacher, teachers union member. Why is this issue center stage?
Well, Vallas has really made this a frequent sort of talking point in his campaign. He sees that the Chicago public schools are in dire straits, and he says part of that reason is because they were closed for so long during COVID-19, and he holds the Chicago Teachers Union responsible for that. He has vowed to sort of remake the police, the school district, and he says Brandon Johnson would just continue these failed policies, while Brandon Johnson says the teachers union is trying to recover from Paul Vallas's failed leadership back in the late 90s. There is so much daylight between these two candidates.
And now Governor Pritzker, who said he's not weighing in on this race, dipped his toe in a little because it was in response to an unearthed conservative radio clip. Paul Vallas is on this conservative radio show calling the governor a dictator,
yes.
Dictator for the closures during the Omicron wave of the pandemic. The governor said Chicago voters today should elect a mayor who will listen to public health experts, not right-wing radio talkers.
My criticism was really focused on the Chicago Teachers Union, who effectively kept schools shut down long after they should have. I mean, they didn't even allow, hybrid instruction. When the surrounding schools had reopened, at least to hybrid or had fully reopened, when other major urban districts had reopened, and when the archdiocese had reopened. I mean, and look at test scores plummeted and violent crime among youth, among school-age youth, skyrocketed.
All right, so this is Vallas responding to that criticism. But again, the governor saying at an unrelated event that Chicagoans should have leaders that listen to public health experts, not right-wing talkers. Paul Vallas has spent a lot of time on right-wing radio here. Is this the governor kind of doing what he said he wasn't going to do, stepping his foot in the race?
It's pretty close, and it really sort of highlights how much of this race, all of a sudden it seems, has really been consumed with what happened during the pandemic. Because if you remember, January 2021, Chicago Teachers Union didn't want to go back in class without mitigation measures in place and rules for when remote learning would start again. The same debate erupted in January 2020 and 2021. So this is really something that the candidates are battling over, because everyone knows that a once-in-a-generation pandemic, maybe not just once in a generation.
Yeah, let's hope it's once in a generation, but we don't know. All right, so let's, I think we have a clip of some more back and forth between Vallas and Johnson, telling each other not to lecture one another. Let's take a look at that.
Someone like Paul Vallas that wants to continue to give someone like me a lecture on what I know versus what he knows is ridiculous, but I'm familiar with that. The fact of the matter is, it takes up to 2 years to become a police officer in the city of Chicago. It takes 2 years. We cannot afford to wait 2 years.
All right, so is a lot of this performative, or is there really no love lost here between these two candidates?
It's both policy and personality, and that is why Chicago voters have such a stark choice in less than 2 weeks.
They have a stark choice, but a lot of debates here. I think there's probably more tomorrow and the rest of this week. So Heather Sharon, we will be following those. Thanks very much. And now back to Brandis for more of today's top stories.
Paris, Kia and Hyundai drivers may be getting a bit more security. Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul is joining 22 other attorneys general calling on Kia America and Hyundai Motor Company to speed up efforts to improve anti-theft software on base vehicle models. Raoul's office says in the last year alone, there were more than 7,000 thefts of these vehicles in Chicago. That accounts for 10% of all registered Kias and 7% of all registered Hyundais in the city. The group of attorneys says the manufacturers failed to equip the vehicles with anti-theft immobilizers, which prevent the car from operating without a key or key fob. And so it begins. The barricades have gone up and traffic is down to 2 left lanes as a massive multi-year construction project begins on the Kennedy Expressway. The lanes will be under construction between Montrose and Hubbard's Cave. The renovation is slated to last 3 years. Meanwhile, the reversible express lanes will only be open to inbound traffic during that time. The construction work will switch to the right lanes in July. A trailblazing black entrepreneur has died. Soft Sheen founder Edward Gardner. Here he is on Chicago Tonight in 1992, telling John Calloway the secret of his success.
What's the secret of your success?
Confidence in the black community worker, and our ability to train them, ability to not give up, to know that there are young men and women out there who want to work, who will do the best job they possibly can.
Gardner and his wife founded the hair care company in 1964. By the late 1980s, it had become one of the largest black-owned beauty companies in the U.S. The couple also recreated the historic Regal Theater on the South Side, bringing in R&B icon Gladys Knight and filmmaker Tyler Perry back when he was just a newcomer. Edward Gardner was 98 years old. Up next in the program, Amanda Vinicky with a look at the accusations facing Donald Trump right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Former President Donald Trump's prediction that he'd be arrested today did not bear out, but he still faces the prospect of indictment. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda, what accusations does the former president face? Remind us.
Well, Paris, first, there are a couple of questions that are at play here. Will the former president be indicted? And if so, for what? Now, that is a question that is currently up to a grand jury in New York.
The standard is not the same standard as at trial, which is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The standard is probable cause that a crime has been committed.
That's Andrea Zopp, one of the attorneys I called on to offer expertise. Zopp once served as the first assistant state's attorney in Cook County. So she knows a little about what Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg may be considering in the Trump case. Zopp says while it's possible nothing comes of it, she does expect Bragg to file some sort of charges.
So what crimes would that be specifically?
Well, Trump is under investigation for violating a New York state law, and that is the falsification of business records. Ron Safer, who led the criminal division for the U.S. Attorney's Office out of Chicago, says no, that would be a misdemeanor unless that falsification was done in the course of another crime. That's where a federal law, a campaign finance violation, comes into play.
That is, that he falsified these business records, allegedly, in order to provide hush money without disclosing that on his campaign finance disclosures. So you've got really two crimes at work for the same statute.
In other words, the initial crime would be Trump allegedly falsifying business records to make it look like he paid attorney's fees when it was in fact a hush payment to Stormy Daniels to conceal their alleged affair during his 2016 presidential campaign. Now, if that was done in furtherance of breaking federal campaign finance law, Safer says that could be a felony. He says the Manhattan DA often brings cases of falsifying business records, but usually it's to do with avoiding taxes or someone trying to make money.
In this case, the motive is to become the president of the United States in a way that conceals pertinent information from the public. It's hard to imagine something that has a higher degree of severity.
Zopp raises another option. If that second crime could be breaking the state fraud law.
That's one of the underlying challenges with this case. The fraud is simply a cover-up of a fact he didn't want in the public eye. And the question is that, seriousness enough in the realm of crime doesn't necessarily make it less of a crime, but the question is it serious enough? Or is it a crime because she wasn't a government official?
Another complication, this is Donald Trump, a former president and a candidate for president. Zopp and Safer both say that shouldn't matter. It's up to prosecutors to treat everyone equally under the law.
And I would have to see, are we making an exception for Donald Trump because he is Donald Trump? If the answer to that is yes, I wouldn't make the exception.
Admittedly, though, Trump isn't just another somebody, so that may be easier said than done.
It is, of course, a significant deal for the country to indict a former president. So, yes, I do think that could be a factor. And this really goes to, I did touch on whether the seriousness of the crime, because the prosecutors make discretionary calls every single day about whether or not a particular offense rises to the level of raising an indictment.
In Paris, whatever happens with this potentially historic case, Trump does still remain under federal scrutiny for the seizing of those confidential documents from his Mar-a-Lago estate.
Among other things like activities related to January 6th, and here in Illinois, we know something about indictments or potential indictments of politicians. We've had a few that we've covered here. All right, Amanda Vinicky, thanks very much.
Thank you.
And we're back with more right after this.
Immigrant workers in Illinois could soon see more protections in the workplace. Democratic state lawmakers, the Illinois Attorney General, and workers' rights groups are pushing for the Work Without Fear Act in Springfield. The law would protect employees from immigration-related threats when reporting labor violations like wage theft, discrimination, and unsafe working conditions. Here to explain more about the bill are Ugo Okere, Policy Director for Raise the Floor Alliance, a workers' rights group, and State Representative Lillian Jimenez of Chicago. She is a sponsor of the bill. We also invited Republican leadership in the House for a representative, but they declined. Thanks to the two of you for joining us. Representative Jimenez, let's start with you. Please, why does Illinois need this bill?
Well, in Illinois currently, workers who seek to talk to their employers or to file a complaint still have a fear that if they raise any issues in the workplace, they can be retaliated. Retaliation can occur, especially vulnerable are immigrant workers. So many immigrant workers I've heard from personally who have come to me to tell me that they're afraid to file any complaint on a wage theft violation, a sexual harassment violation, or just raise any concern at all because of the threat of their employers. It's not just a perceived threat. We know of many cases where employers have actually threatened to call immigration officials, police, let people know, or threaten folks based on their immigration status. That's why this is needed.
Ugo Okere, what's been the experience of some of the workers that you all work with when they want to report abuse or intimidation?
You know, we had a press conference just this past Monday with Representative Jimenez and Attorney General Kwame Raoul, in which, we heard extremely harrowing testimonies, not just from our workers, but again, from, experiences that Representative Jimenez had before she was even state representative. We heard from Isabel from Arise Chicago, who talked about how she worked for her employer for the past 20 years. And over the course of time, accumulated $10,000 in back pay. And you only accumulate that much money, owed money from your employer, if at some point you were too scared or too fearful to be able to claim the money that you are owed. And it's stories like that that we keep hearing over and over again across the worker organizations that we represent, in which employers will do things like, the moment that you demand your wages, the moment that you ask for better working conditions, they'll tell you that they have ICE on the phone to deport you and your family. And so it's legislation like this that is going to really protect workers across the state of Illinois from these kinds of threats, and tell workers that this is a state that is a welcoming state for immigrants, and it's a welcoming state for all workers who seek to claim their rights.
Representative Jimenez, what protections previously existed for undocumented workers?
Well, there are federal protections in the Immigration Nationality Act that protect workers from being discriminated based on their citizenship status. Unfortunately, most workers don't know the Office of the Department of Justice and are not aware of how to file those complaints. And unfortunately, there is no civil or a monetary penalty currently. And so what this protection would do is actually have the Department of Labor and Attorney General, which are agencies here in the state of Illinois, which many workers are familiar with. They will be able to actually enforce these retaliation provisions, these whistleblower protections. And we know that is really important because that's the first line. That's where workers go when they are facing wage theft or discrimination.
Ugo Okere, what recourse do workers currently have to get help if they've experienced abuse or intimidation?
There are, under the NLRA, there exists protected concerted activity, right? Where if you are, working with or speaking to other workers in the workplace about issues that you're facing, and you all are trying to take collective action, there are protections at the federal level. However, at this level, at the state, there aren't many when it comes to these specific issues of immigration-based retaliation, right? So if it is an employer who is threatening to call ICE, or an employer that is using employment verification in ways that are not authorized by federal law, you don't really have any recourse. And so that's why it's so important to have this very specific and clear definition of retaliatory practices, and also very clear ways for employees to be able to claim rights under the law.
Representative Jimenez, what authority would this legislation give the Attorney General's office, any other offices for that matter, and what kind of consequences could an employer face?
This act, the Work Without Fear Act, allows the Department of Labor to create a infrastructure to investigate complaints. So I previously worked at the Department of Labor, and I'm very familiar with the wage claims process and how workers really trust the Department of Labor because the Department of Labor has put many, many years into working with all communities and regardless of status. And so immigrant communities do go to the Department of Labor. And so this act will allow the Department of Labor to also be able not only to enforce the wage theft, such as the story that Ugo mentioned with a worker who was owed tens of thousands of dollars, but also to enforce the provision that we're proposing here, which would create an anti-retaliation provision. So if that same worker went to their employer or went to the Department of Labor or the Attorney General's office to complain, they couldn't then be fired or retaliated against, or the employer could not threaten to call ICE or the police to report their immigration status. And that is a huge difference. I want to emphasize, I've talked to people so many times when I was in that position who told me they were afraid to file the complaint, who came to the department but said, I don't know if I want to sign this piece of paper that says that my employer is going to know that I'm complaining because I am fearful that my immigration status will be used against me. Some people maybe in some cases were undocumented, but sometimes people were legal permanent residents. Sometimes people were U.S. citizens. The fact remains that people in this country who are immigrants still have a fear because of some of the policies that that have been put into place. There is a fear that has been instilled in this community. And so what this bill would do is allow the Department of Labor to reassure people, the Attorney General's office to reassure people that in fact, this is a law in Illinois, that if you have an underlying claim, you have the ability to go somewhere and to file that complaint without fear of losing not only your livelihood, but possibly, your ability to stay in the United States.
Representative, go ahead. We've got about 20 seconds left, Ugo.
Representative Jimenez is right. The whistleblower protections in this bill also expanded to not just filing a formal complaint, but also filing or speaking to a public body or a public official who's conducting an investigation, and you will still be protected even if, again, it's not a formal complaint filed with an agency.
Okay, that's good to know. Representative Lillian Jimenez and Ugo Okere, thanks to you both for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Up next, local medical students meet their match. But first, a look at the weather.
After years of preparation and long hours spent studying, students at Loyola University Chicago are on their way to becoming doctors. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez attends a special ceremony called Match Day and tells us more.
It's the final hurdle. Hundreds of medical students anxiously open their white envelopes.
San Diego! We go to San Diego!
Inside is the name of the institution where they will start the next chapter of their careers.
It's just exciting. Used to San Diego and 4 or 5 years of medical school. It's exciting and exciting to be together at the same institution in California.
It's called Match Day, where med students across the country match with the residency program to begin training in their specialties. David Mata is planning to pursue family medicine.
I'm very passionate about serving the underserved. I love everything, so working with kids, working with expecting mothers, so family medicine is the place to be.
Mata is one of 5 students who studied at Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine as a DACA recipient. DACA is a policy where children of undocumented immigrants are temporarily protected from deportation. Professor Mark Kashevsky says 50 DACA students known as Dreamers have gone through the program since 2014.
We do not have a physician workforce that has the diversity we need to properly serve the patient populations in the United States. And so when we heard about this qualified group of applicants who were bilingual, bicultural, had this resilience because they kept going when people told them that they couldn't do it, that they wouldn't be able to because they weren't citizens. That's the kind of thing that will make somebody a great doctor.
It's a career-defining moment. Sumbul Siddiqui is also a dreamer who matched with her first choice, the University of Chicago, to study family medicine. It's a full-circle moment for the med student, whose family migrated to the U.S. from Pakistan when she was a little girl.
It was hard for me to get health care for my parents. Ultimately, it started just with my own challenges. And then volunteering at free health clinics, I saw that there were other families like mine, right? I wasn't the only one. And I thought, okay, you know what? Maybe through medicine, I can also, help my community.
Siddiqui says she is determined to give back to those who've struggled like her family.
The medical field can be often distrusting, and people don't know if they can trust their doctors. And I think when you see people that look like you have an instant connection.
Mata and Siddiqui are among 165 Loyola students on their next step to becoming doctors.
Don't let anyone ever say no, that it's impossible. You can do it. Okay, find your people. They are there, and they will help you, and you will get there. Believe in your dreams.
Now an American citizen, Mata hopes to one day help people along the border.
What would you tell that kid from Mexico?
Oh my God. I would tell him that you're going to reach so many obstacles, so many challenges. You're going to get knocked down so many times. You're going to get back up, and you're going to do it.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
What a great day for all those students. Very inspiring story there. And Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine was the first medical school in the United States to accept DACA recipients.
Of course, and congrats to those future doctors. Best of luck to them, because we're all going to need good doctors. That is our show for this Tuesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 10. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a wonderful evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.
On Agatha Christie's Poirot.
I saw a murder once.
At a Halloween party, a girl is killed. Poirot wonders if her claim
she once witnessed a murder
is the key to the case.
She'll have to tell a tall tale.
It's a hunt for a terrifying killer.
Some lunatic.
But will he succeed?
A Halloween story.
Find out on Agatha Christie's Poirot.
Thursday at 7 on WTTW.
Next time.
Welcome to our annual masked ball.
When Lady Felicia and Lord Montague host a party.
Send me your great dancer.
A man with aspirations to be prime minister is threatened.
The Red Death is coming.
And when he's murdered,
strangled,
Father Brown is on the case.
Indeed.
But he'll need all his friends to help. Father Brown.